The rain came down in restless sheets that night, drumming against the windshield like a warning no one could hear. Naveed gripped the steering wheel tighter, eyes straining through the blur of neon lights bouncing off the wet streets. He'd been driving for hours, picking up strangers who came and went like shadows, each one carrying their own untold stories. But when the next passenger slid into the back seat of his taxi, Naveed felt something shift in the air, something he couldn't explain. The man was quiet at first, almost too quiet, his face hid in the shadows, but his voice carried a strange familiarity. "Long shift tonight, Naveed?" he asked casually, as if he already knew. Naveed stiffened. He couldn't remember ever telling him his name. At first, he brushed it off as a lucky guess. Maybe the man had seen his ID badge. But then came the next sentence, delivered with calm precision. "Still fighting with your brother over the inheritance?" The words hit like a blade to the chest. Naveed's breath caught in his throat. That was something he'd never told a single soul. Not his colleagues, not even his closest friends. He forced a nervous laugh, glancing in the rearview mirror to catch the man's eyes. But the stranger just smiled faintly, like someone who already knew the ending to a story that hadn't been told. "You hide it well," the man continued softly, the guilt about what happened that night. Naveed's pulse quickened. His grip on the wheel grew slippery with sweat. He wanted to ask who this man was, but fear sealed his lips shut. The city lights flickered past, each one flashing like a clue in a mystery he was trapped inside. Every turn of the road seemed to close in tighter, as if the streets themselves were listening. He could hear the passengers' slow breathing in the back, calm and steady, while his own heart hammered louder with every passing second. Naveed's instinct screamed to pull over, to end the ride, to get away. But he couldn't, because the man leaned forward, close enough for his words to crawl into Naveed's ear, and whispered something only one other person could have known. Someone who wasn't alive anymore. And in that moment, Naveed realized this was no ordinary passenger. Naveed's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel. The city outside was alive with flickering lights and the hum of late-night traffic, but inside the taxi, it felt suffocatingly quiet. His passenger's words hung in the air like smoke, choking him. How could this man know something no one else in the world could have known? As the wipers beat back the storm, fragments of memory crashed into Naveed's mind. He'd been a driver for nearly 10 years, long enough to know that most rides were forgettable. A drunk businessman, a couple arguing in whispers, a tired student staring at their phone. But he also knew that every person carried secrets, including himself, and his, buried deep, sealed tight, were never supposed to resurface. He thought back to his brother, Sammy. They hadn't spoken properly in months, not since their father's death and the fight over the inheritance. Naveed had wanted to keep the family home, a place filled with childhood laughter and his mother's fading perfume. Sammy wanted to sell it, cash in, move on. Their arguments had grown bitter, shouting matches that carved a canyon between them. Naveed never told anyone how guilty he felt for the things he'd said that night, the cruel words he wished he could take back. And yet here was this stranger, pulling those wounds out like he'd been there in the room. "Who are you?" Naveed finally asked, his voice low, more shaky than he intended. The man didn't answer immediately. He leaned back into the shadows, the faint glow of passing streetlights brushing across his face, but never fully revealing it. "I know things," he said softly, "things you'd rather keep hidden." The words sent a shiver crawling down Naveed's spine. He thought of the accident last year, the one he tried to forget. The late-night drive, the screech of tires, the moment his world split in two. He never told anyone what he saw in those headlights, or how he still woke up drenched in sweat, reliving it. "Stop the car," Naveed whispered to himself, but his hands didn't obey. His body moved on autopilot, carrying him deeper into the maze of streets. The man leaned forward again, and this time Naveed caught the glint of his eyes in the mirror. Calm, almost knowing, as if he weren't a passenger at all, but a guide leading him somewhere he wasn't ready to go. "Some truths," the stranger murmured, "can't be buried forever." Naveed swallowed hard, his chest tight, his mind screaming with questions. Why was this happening tonight of all nights? Who could this man be? A ghost? A blackmailer? Or something worse? The city blurred around him, but the road ahead felt like it was pulling him into the heart of a secret he'd spent years trying to escape. And deep down, Naveed realized the ride was only just beginning. Naveed's breathing grew heavier with every turn of the wheel. The city had always been his escape, its endless streets, the illusion of freedom in constant motion. But tonight the streets felt like traps, folding in on themselves, each intersection narrowing his choices. The stranger's presence wasn't just unsettling, it was unbearable. He knew too much. "What do you want from me?" Naveed finally asked, voice cracking under the weight of fear. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he tapped his fingers against the glass, almost rhythmically, like he was waiting for the right moment to speak. Then, calmly, "I want the truth." The word stabbed at Naveed. Truth was the one thing he avoided most. His whole life was stitched together with quiet lies. Lies to his brother, lies to his friends, lies to himself. He told himself he was a good man, that the past was behind him. But guilt had sharp edges, and the stranger seemed intent on cutting him open. Naveed's mind drifted again to the accident. He remembered the blur of headlights, the shattering glass, the silence afterward. He remembered walking away, telling himself it wasn't his fault. But the man's voice in the back seat dragged the memory closer, forcing him to relive what he had buried. "You could have stopped," the stranger said softly, like he'd been there too. "But you didn't." Naveed's grip on the wheel trembled. His chest tightened with anger now, not just fear. "You don't know me," he snapped. "You don't know what I've been through." But the anger faded as quickly as it came, replaced by dread. Because deep down, Naveed knew the man didn't know. And worse, if he knew about the accident, what else could he reveal? Meanwhile, another thought burned at the edges of his mind. Sammy. His brother. What if this wasn't about the accident at all? What if someone had sent this passenger to test him, to break him, to make him confess? The idea twisted his gut. Maybe Sammy wanted revenge. Maybe he'd found a way to expose him. The inheritance fight wasn't just about money. It was about loyalty, about family, about betrayal. Naveed had chosen the house over his brother. And in doing so, he'd lost more than he realized. The rain thickened outside, pounding the roof like a drumbeat, urging him toward a decision. Should he throw the stranger out? Should he demand answers? Or should he keep driving, pretending he had control when, in truth, he didn't? The stranger leaned forward again, his face close enough for Naveed to feel his breath. "You know where you're going, don't you?" Naveed's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. For the first time, he saw the faintest smirk on the man's lips. It was not the smile of a passenger. It was the smile of someone steering the night's events, even from the back seat. And in that instant, Naveed realized with cold clarity, this wasn't just a ride. It was a reckoning. The rain hammered harder, drowning out the city's usual noise, leaving only the rhythmic thud of wipers and the pounding of Naveed's heart. His eyes darted to the mirror, to the shadowy passenger whose faint smirk seemed to widen with every passing block. Naveed's pulse raced. The stranger wasn't just riding along. He was steering the night, shaping it, bending it towards something inevitable. Naveed swallowed, his throat dry. "Tell me what you want. Money? A confession? Just say it." The man chuckled under his breath, low and steady. "It's not about what I want. It's about what you've been hiding." Naveed's grip faltered. The taxi swerved slightly before he corrected it, earning a honk from a passing car. His skin prickled with sweat despite the chill. Every nerve screamed for escape, but there was nowhere to run. The streets looked endless, yet every turn felt like a trap. The man's voice came again, softer now, but sharper than any blade. "Do you think the past just disappears, Naveed? That you can bury it beneath long nights and endless rides?" The words struck home. He thought of that night again, the accident, the body, the silence that followed. His secret wasn't just guilt anymore. It was alive, breathing, sitting in the back seat of his taxi. "Stop talking," Naveed barked, his voice breaking. His chest rose and fell rapidly, panic clawing at his ribs. He forced himself to breathe, to focus on the road. But the man's reflection in the mirror never blinked, never shifted. He was too calm, too certain. And then, like a needle sliding into his veins, the stranger whispered, "You know where this road leads. You've been driving toward it all night." Naveed's eyes widened. For the first time, he realized his route wasn't random. He hadn't entered a destination, yet somehow his hands had guided him down familiar streets, the way toward the outskirts, the place he hadn't returned to since that night. His stomach churned. His knuckles ached from gripping the wheel. Was this fate? Or was the stranger pulling strings he couldn't see? "You don't have to do this," Naveed muttered, though he wasn't sure if he was pleading with the man or with himself. The passenger leaned closer, his shadow stretching long across the seat. "But you already are." A flash of lightning cut across the sky, illuminating the interior of the cab. For a split second, Naveed saw the man's face clearly, calm, cold, and somehow familiar, like someone from a dream he wished he could forget. Naveed gasped, nearly losing control of the wheel. His mind scrambled. Did he know this man? From the accident? From his past? He couldn't think. He couldn't breathe. The stranger's smile returned, slow and deliberate. "Drive faster," he said, and without meaning to, Naveed pressed his foot on the accelerator. The engine roared, the taxi surged forward, and the city around them blurred into streaks of light and rain. Whatever waited at the end of this road, Naveed was hurtling straight toward it. The taxi roared through the storm, tires slicing through puddles as if the city itself were urging Naveed forward. His breath came in shallow bursts. Every flicker of neon across the glass felt like a spotlight exposing him. The stranger's voice pressed against his chest like a weight, every word chipping away at the walls Naveed had built around his secrets. "You're driving back to the beginning," the man said, almost tenderly, "to the place where it all started." Naveed's eyes darted to the mirror, but he couldn't hold the gaze. His heart thudded. He knew exactly where the road was taking him. The stretch of highway where the accident happened. The place he'd avoided for months, convincing himself he could outrun the memory. But then the stranger leaned forward, and his next words shattered the fragile thread of control holding Naveed together. It wasn't an accident. The words rang out louder than the storm. Naveed's grip faltered, his chest seized with disbelief. "What did you say?" The man's eyes glinted in the dark. "You didn't just drive away that night. You were meant to." Naveed's mind spun. 1,000 questions collided in his head. Meant to? What did that mean? Who was this man? Then, like lightning striking twice, realization slammed into him. His brother, Sami, the inheritance, the endless fights, the bitterness that poisoned everything. Had Sami sent this man to punish him? To drag him back to the crime he never admitted? But before Naveed could speak, his phone buzzed violently in the cup holder. He snatched it up with trembling fingers. An unknown number. One new message. "Don't trust him. He's not who you think." Naveed's stomach dropped. His knuckles tightened on the wheel. His throat closed in confusion. The man in the back seat smiled faintly, as though he already knew what the message said. "Who sent this?" Naveed demanded, his voice cracking. He wanted to believe it was Sami reaching out. But what if it wasn't? What if the betrayal was deeper, closer? "Focus on the road," the passenger murmured, unshaken. Naveed's thoughts raced, colliding with fear, guilt, and the faint spark of something else. Hope. If the text was real, then maybe he wasn't trapped alone with this man's truth. Maybe there was another layer he hadn't seen. But that hope came at a price. Because now he didn't know who to fear more. The man behind him, calm and knowing, or the person sending warnings from the shadows. The rain thickened, the road narrowed, and his choices closed in like jaws around him. For the first time that night, Naveed realized the real danger wasn't just in what the stranger knew. It was in not knowing who, if anyone, he could trust, and that realization drove him faster into the storm. The storm raged like it had been waiting for this moment. Rain hammered the windshield, lightning tore open the sky, and the taxi hurtled down the deserted highway as if the night itself demanded a reckoning. Naveed's phone buzzed again in his trembling hand, another text flashing. He'll make you confess. Don't let him. His throat tightened. He threw a glance into the rearview mirror. The passenger sat calm as ever, his face lit briefly by a streak of lightning, serene, unshaken, as if he belonged here, in this storm, more than Naveed did. You still don't see it, do you? The man said softly. This road was always going to bring you back. Naveed's grip faltered. Back to what? He snapped. You think I don't remember that night? I live it every day. His voice broke, raw, torn between rage and regret. The man leaned forward, his words slow, deliberate. It wasn't just guilt, Naveed. It was choice. The words cut deeper than any accusation. A choice. Naveed's breath caught. He thought of the headlights, the figure on the road, the way he froze. He'd told himself it was an accident, that he hadn't seen clearly. But in his heart, he knew he had seen. He had hesitated, and that hesitation had cost a life. The car shuddered as he swerved, pulling onto the shoulder. The tires screeched against wet gravel, the taxi sliding to a stop beneath a flickering streetlight. The storm howled, but inside, a silence heavier than thunder filled the cab. Naveed turned, his face pale, his eyes burning. "Who are you?" he whispered. The man's faint smile didn't waver. "Someone who remembers what you'd rather forget." And then, like glass breaking, clarity struck Naveed. The eyes in the mirror, the calmness, the knowing. They weren't unfamiliar. They were his own. The passenger leaned forward fully now, his face illuminated. Naveed gasped. He was staring at himself, an older version, worn by years, eyes heavy with judgment. The messages on his phone vibrated again, but he didn't need to look. They weren't from Sammy. They weren't from anyone else. They were warnings from his own conscience, fragments of a guilt he could no longer bury. His hands shook as he pressed them to his face. Tears blurred his vision. "Why now?" he whispered. The older version of himself, the passenger, spoke with calm finality. "Because you can't keep driving in circles. Tonight, you decide. Confession or silence forever." Lightning cracked, blinding. When Naveed lowered his hands, the back seat was empty. Only his own reflection stared back at him in the rain-streaked mirror. For the first time in years, he let out a sob. The storm outside raged on, but inside, Naveed finally reached for his phone. This time not to run, but to call. To confess. And as the line rang, the night around him felt just a little lighter, as if the storm had been waiting for this moment all along. The storm finally began to ease, its fury softening into a steady drizzle that painted the highway in silver streaks. Naveed sat in the front seat of the taxi, his body still trembling, his hands gripping the phone like it was the last fragile thread holding him together. On the other end of the line, a dispatcher's calm voice answered, and with it came the moment he'd been running from for far too long. His confession spilled out in broken fragments, about the accident, the silence, the guilt that had haunted him every mile he drove since. Words he'd buried clawed their way to the surface, raw and unpolished, but real. For the first time in years, he stopped lying to himself. When he ended the call, the cab was quiet. No shadowed passenger, no whispers in the dark. Only Naveed, alone, staring at his reflection in the rain-speckled mirror. But something had shifted. The man who had haunted him wasn't a ghost or a stranger. It was his own conscience, a version of himself that refused to let him keep running. The text messages, the smirk in the back seat, the voice that knew his darkest secrets, they were all pieces of the same truth. The weight of guilt always finds a way to speak. Naveed started the engine again, this time not to flee, but to move forward. The road ahead was still slick and uncertain, but it no longer felt like a trap. It felt like a choice. For the first time in years, he chose to face what he had done, no matter the consequences. He thought of Sammy, of the house they had fought over, of the words that had poisoned their bond. He knew there were apologies waiting, bridges to rebuild, even if some were too burned to cross. But maybe honesty, finally, was the first step. The city came back into view, neon lights glowing through the mist, no longer mocking him, but guiding him home. Naveed let out a long, shuddering breath, as if releasing years of weight he had carried in silence. The city came back into view, neon lights glowing through the mist, no longer mocking him but guiding him home. Naveed let out a long, shuddering breath, as if releasing years of weight he had carried in silence. In the quiet hum of the taxi, his own voice lingered in his mind, steady and resolute. You can't keep driving in circles. He knew now what that meant. Secrets, guilt, regret. They trap you in loops until you choose to break them. And as he drove back toward the city, toward whatever awaited him, Naveed realized that the scariest passenger he had ever carried was himself. The story of that night wasn't about fear or betrayal or punishment. It was about truth and how facing it can be the only road to freedom. As he merged back into the steady stream of headlights, Naveed whispered softly, almost to the storm itself. Sometimes the only way out is through.